And I'm doing that on purpose because there's just too much content for all of it, and there's a right place to stop. Okay. And the right place to stop is going to be a little bit short today. And then it will work out. I promise you, it'll all make sense when we get these at this time next Friday. We're going to talk about the basic web design. We're going to focus a lot of attention today on usability considerations, the things that you're going to need, and we're going to focus on that home page. The other two pages, services, about, and contact, we're going to do those next week. So that'll all be included then. Hey, Edison, good to have you. I don't know that we've seen you before, so thank you for joining us. I appreciate that. So this will be what we'll cover today, mostly the first half of this. And we're going to talk about usability considerations. The very first thing to remember when we talk about your website is it should be usable. And there's been a great book written by Steve Krug, and it was written 20 years ago. And this is the title of the book, Don't Make Me Think. When I click on your web property, I should not have to think. I should only have to decide. And the whole purpose of this is to get the person to take an action. We used to call that the most wanted response. But the point is that we want that person to take a particular action. And this book, which the reason why I did this is because I wanted you to see he wrote the first book in 2000. He updated it in whatever this is, 2008, and then he republished it a third time, a third edition. Anytime you get a third edition, then you know that this has been a rock solid piece of information and you can count on it. And it's based upon that foundation that you don't need to think when you go to somebody's website. Eliminate that thinking from the process. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about don't make me think? Do you get that? I go to some websites today and I look and go, what am I supposed to do next? Make it very easy for people. Don't make them think. We'll give you some examples of this. Here's some great examples of don't make me think. On this end of the spectrum are things that are obvious. On this end of the spectrum are things that require thought. So on this side over here, we have a button that simply says jobs. Well, guess what? If the website's about jobs, then you're going to want to click on that button, correct? It's obvious what that's about. Employment opportunities, you just made jobs more complicated than it needed to be. Everybody following along with me? And then if you throw in this twist, something that you might think is really, really cool and call it Jobs-a-rama, people are going to wonder, what am I supposed to do? And why should I want to click there? So don't make it require thought. Make it very, very obvious what you want to do. Make every page on your website self-evident. It ought to be obvious what it is that page is about. It ought to be self-explanatory. There shouldn't be anything complicated about it. It ought to be very, very obvious what people are supposed to do next. Because when people don't get it, what do? They go somewhere else. There's no shortage of options today. Don't ever think that you've got the one thing that everybody that is unique and nobody else has. And once they find you, they're going to take every action that you tell them to take, because it's not true. They will bounce out of that page. You are only, my very first trainer on building websites back in 2006, my very first trainer said, you are one mouse click away from oblivion. And don't think they won't take that one mouse click. Today, that mouse click decision is made in the first 7 seconds. If 4 of those seconds are spent with the page loading, then you're down to 3 seconds. Right? All right. Make every page self-evident. Make it obvious what it is that you're asking the person to do. Make it very self-explanatory. Keep it very, very simple so that it makes a tremendous amount of sense. All right. The website can't land on the moon. It has to be really, really obvious. Visitor actions. Think about this for a minute. People scan, they don't read. Well, if people scan, what is the most important element on your website? Somebody tell me what the most important element is on the website because people scan. It's the headline. The headline is the most important element on the page because they're going to read it first. We were taught to do that from the time we picked up a newspaper 40 years ago. Because we're convinced we don't need to read everything. Right? If the headline does its job, it'll tell me what I need to read. If the first sentence in the first paragraph does its job, it'll tell me what I need to read. If the first paragraph does its job, it'll tell me whether I'm going to stay on the page or not. Everybody follow? We'll give you two examples in a little bit, and we'll take a look at the difference between those, because there is a substitute to reading every line. And what is it? Somebody tell me what. There's an amazing substitute. You can't replace a headline with it, but there's an amazing substitute for reading everything that's on the page. Anybody know what that is? It's video. Video. If I have a video and it's about 3 minutes, then people are going to stop and they're going to take the time to listen to the video because they don't have to pay attention to the page. Hey, Ken. So people have become really, really good at scanning, and your home page is not a blog, so don't dump everything you know on your home page. All right? Your job there is to get them to take the next action. We'll talk about that next action in just a little bit. We don't go through the entire site. We usually park at the first reasonable option. Now, I get sales pages every day. I get inundated with sales pages every day. I analyze sales pages. I write reviews of sales pages. I look carefully at sales pages all the time. And the very first thing I do is I have to remind myself of what my reason is for doing that. Because I will scroll down and see what the buy option is, what the buy button looks like, what the offer is being made, and I skip over a whole bunch of other stuff because I'm looking for that reasonable option. What's my first reasonable option? Does that make sense to everybody? It's important that you you're not the only person who thinks that. Everybody who goes to the page thinks that. The funny part of it is every one of us know it, and I see people building websites all the time where they fail to take that thing into consideration. That we're going to simply we're going to scan the site till we get to the first obvious action. I have a really interesting story about that, Em. I had a lady call me. She was the promotional manager for the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series. And she called me one evening and she said, Eric, can you describe to me in one paragraph what you do? And I said, that's really challenging. She said, you know, I do it for people all the time, and I struggle doing it for myself. And so what Em just said, it's obvious when you say it, but somehow you overlook it when it comes to your own pages. And we struggle with promoting ourselves. And so that's a really common issue. It doesn't make any difference how good we are at what we do. We do it less effectively for ourselves. So this is really important for us to go through this morning and pay careful attention. We don't figure things out. We power through them. I'll put that in male terms. We don't read the instructions until we've broken something first, right? I'm just going to go to that first call to action button, figure out whether that's something I need to do, and jump into that first action and see what's going on. The bottom line is no matter how much text and information you add to your site, people will still act as if your website's a billboard. Do you get the billboard concept here? What do you look for on the billboard? You look for 4 things. You look to see what is the product, right? That's what you're looking for on the billboard. What's the product? The second thing that you look at is you look at the headline. The third thing that you look at is what am I being asked to do on that website? If I look at a McDonald's billboard, I see the golden arches. That's the product. That's their brand that they're putting in front of us. And then the caption says, "You deserve a break today," and it tells me where to turn off at. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know anything else. No matter how much text and information or graphics or even video that you add to your site, people are still going to treat it like it's a billboard. Everybody agree with that? Because if you struggle with this one, you're going to struggle with everything else we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about designing for the web. You design like a billboard. What do you have? You have some things pretty obvious, right? Yeah, that's a good question, Art. You said that there are 4 things on a billboard. You got 3. The 3 are the 3 that I mentioned was the 4th one is the background. It's the background, which reminds you that there's something hanging out there in space. So, but it's the 3 things that you notice on the billboard. That's what prevents them from just looking like words that are hanging out in space, is the background. Design like a billboard. Use conventions. Let me explain to you what I mean by conventions. There is a standard convention for a link, in-text link, right? There's a standard convention for that. Anybody know what that is? What's the standard convention for an in-text link? I know that when I see that, I can click there. It's blue or it's blue underline. But those are standard conventions. There's a standard convention that the logo goes in the upper left-hand corner, that a call to action goes in the upper right-hand corner, that the menu goes across the top. Those are standard conventions. Those standard conventions make it very, very easy for people to know what to do. I'm not looking around. Remember, don't make me think. If 99% of the websites that are built today are built with those conventions built into them, then it would be ridiculous for me to change that, because I'm now asking the person to think. Everybody understand? The next thing is use the plain language of the reader. I have a simple rule. I used this rule clear back when I was teaching debate 25 years ago. I told my students, anytime you have to define a term, use the term. Or use the definition, not the term. Anytime you have to define a term, use the definition and not the term. Because I just did it. It's the reason why I kept the word right here, the conventions. This word right here, I had to define it, right? But it's easier in this bullet points to use conventions than it was to say, put your logo in the left-hand corner, put your menu in the middle, put your call to action on the right-hand side. You understand what I'm saying? So those are definitions of that term. The term without the definitions would make very little sense, correct? So use the most plain language possible. The Albert Einstein comment, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. Use the plain language. Number 4, don't reinvent the wheel. That goes back to what we were talking about conventions. The logo always goes in the right-hand corner, or I'm sorry, in the left-hand corner. A call to action goes in the right-hand corner. You put a call to action above the first fold on the page. Those are standard ways. Don't reinvent that wheel. Take a look at incredibly successful sales pages and make sure that you're incorporating those same things and those same principles and those same actions and those same conventions into the website that you're designing. No reason to reinvent the wheel. If somebody spends $10 million to drive traffic to a website, then you want to pay attention to how they built it. Is that correct? So don't reinvent the wheel. Be consistent. Remember our example up here? Right here, we threw this word in here, Jobs-a-rama. Just use the word jobs and keep it consistent. Now, you may make a little tweak to that as you go, and I'll show you an example of that in just a little bit, but be consistent. Use the same language, find the same things in the same place, so that when you have your homepage and your about page, the header looks the same. Because if it doesn't look the same, then what is the person going to think? They're not in the same website. Be consistent. Everything that you do should look exactly like everything else that you do. Everybody understand that, the importance of that consistency? Because you want people to focus on your call to action, not on trying to figure out what you're doing. So be consistent. Keep things organized and clutter-free. Organized and clutter-free. One of the mistakes that people make is when they make their font too small. They make their lines too long. I'm going to get into that in just a second. They make their lines too long, their paragraphs too long. They bury people in lengthy text, and it's no longer organized or clutter-free. In the last week, I think I've looked at about 6 old HTML designed websites, and the first thing I found them on was on my phone, and the moment I looked at that, I went, I can't read this. I'm done. How many of you have seen any of those in the most recent times? And a lot of times they're information websites, but M's brought up a good thing. It's been pushed down our throats that we all need to have long form sales pages. I'm going to chase that for just a moment, if I can. I believe that a sales page, if I were the sales rep and I walked into your office and I sat down across from your desk and I was going to sell you on a service that I had, I would only want to tell you the things that were necessary to make that sale. And I would try to anticipate what's going through your mind at the time. Not everything is going through your mind, but what's going through your mind at the time. Now, I'm going to get into that in a week or two. But here's the point. I think your sales pages need to have as much copy as is necessary to make the sale and not more. Rob's correct. Most of us like short and sweet. And so what you do is you design your page, even though it may be slightly long form, you design it so that you can make a short form version of it as the person scans the page. Make sense? Well, I agree, but it's the challenge of a salesperson. I can't tell you how many times when I was training salespeople, I'd want to grab them by the back of the neck and drag them out of the room because they talked too much. They said way more than was needed. And that's the reason why we focus our attention on the other person, that hero. What are we looking for? And so what we want to do in our sales copy is we want to do exactly what Art says. Once you've made the sale, you need to shut up. Okay? Now, Okay, and I'm gonna give you one more thing, and this is actually gonna come later on in weeks to come. But that's the reason why when you're doing sales pages, you do multiple landing pages and you drive highly targeted traffic to that. So if I am doing if I have a promotional website for people in the wedding business, okay? So I have cake bakers and I have gown makers and I have all those kinds of people that are associated with weddings. I am not going to send them all to the same sales page, because what the cake baker is looking for and what the gown maker is looking for are two completely different things. So I need two different landing pages so that they give them only what they need. All right. All right. Let's get back to the scanning basics. Number one, avoid big blocks of text. Avoid big blocks of text. I can't say this often enough, loud enough to enough people. Avoid big blocks of text. You don't need, there's a difference between writing for the web and writing for an encyclopedia. That makes sense? I did a webinar one day when I held up a 1917 edition of the World Book Encyclopedia. And yes, I have one of those. I have the entire set. But that was written 103 years ago. There's a big, big difference between the way we wrote text 100 years ago and the way we write it today. People's attention span is much briefer. In 1917, they had nothing to do but read. Today, it's a little different. Frederick, you're getting ahead of me just a little bit. The next one is don't let the headlines float. In other words, make sure that the headline's attached. Make sure that it's attached. Put it inside of a box. Make sure it goes with the paragraph that's there. Keep the text attached to the things that you're doing. That makes it easy to scan. Don't make your headline about one thing and the first paragraph about something else. That leaves it floating off in space. Does that make sense? That's what I mean by float. Don't let your headlines float out there. Don't give them. Don't put something in the headline that doesn't immediately follow in your text. The number one thing that people violate is this one right here, short paragraphs. Keep your paragraphs very short. 3 sentences in a paragraph is getting long. All right. If you've got multiple things to put in a paragraph, maybe you want to use bullet points. Maybe bullet points would work more effectively than maybe 3 bullet points would work more effectively than 3 sentences buried in the middle of 3 other sentences inside of a paragraph. There's an art and science to writing bullet points. We'll talk about that at a different time. But using bullet points is extremely important, and it's very effective and looks wonderful on the page. I'll show you an example of that in a little bit. All right. Highlight key terms. There's a couple of ways you can do that. You can change the color. You can put them in a colored box. There's lots of things that you can do to highlight certain key factors that you want to make sure that people see. And when I show you the 2 website examples, you'll see what I'm talking about highlight the key terms. This is a writing teacher's term analogy. It's called write neat. In other words, eliminate some words. Keep your writing as neat as possible. Don't put extra stuff in there to fill it out. Remember, your homepage and those key pages are not blogs. The length of a blog is important. The length of a homepage is, I want to get to that most wanted response. I want to get that action that I'm looking for. It has been estimated that more than 50% of the words on any given document can be eliminated. Annex Single posted this on his website the other day, and I wanted to share this with you because I think this is pretty powerful. The fastest way to increase understanding, reduce the length of your sentences. See, if all the copywriter gets paid for is the number of words, then we're in trouble. I believe that copywriters should be getting paid based upon the number of results. And that will change the way they write drastically, right? The fastest way to increase understanding is reduce your sentence length. The average number of words per sentence, up to 8, 100% comprehension. 9 to 14, 90%. 80%, 15 to 18. And let me tell you, it's really easy to blow past 18. Because most of us talk in run-on sentences, and we also write in run-on sentences. White space is the most important thing there is. I teach my students this all the time. The difference between a blob of ink and a beautiful poem is white space. What makes ink become letters are the white space. The creative use of white space turns a blob into a poem. Does that make sense to everybody? I also say, let your text breathe. All right, so this is a really good reminder to us that if I want to increase my comprehension, if I want to increase the understanding, if I want to increase the action, I decrease the size of my sentences. And if I have only 8 words in a sentence and I keep that 3 sentences to a paragraph rule, then I'm going to have plenty of white space, right? Way back when I was teaching school, I would tell my students to do this. I want you to write 7 pages. When they would write the 7 pages, I would give it back to them and tell them, now I want you to turn those 7 pages into 7 paragraphs. That accomplishes exactly the same goal as the 7 pages. And then I would give that back to them and say, I want you now to take those 7 paragraphs and turn them into 7 sentences. And then I would give it back and say, take the 7 sentences and turn it into 7 words. And then we built everything around those 7 words. Now, 7's not any magic here, but do you understand the flow that's taking place there? 7 pages, 7 paragraphs, 7 sentences, 7 words. What we're doing is we're writing neat, we're eliminating 50% of those words. And then we're getting it down to the essence of what we're trying to communicate. The easiest thing to do is the 7 pages. The hardest thing to do is to refine it down to the 7 words. And let me tell you, it is a lot easier to go down this way than it is to try to go this way. Now, don't worry about it, Mark. I do my best to try to make my grammar correct, but I knock these things out. You know how many of these I do a week? I don't fuss with it. Just don't fuss with it. 7 pages, 7 paragraphs, 7 sentences, and 7 words. More than I care to share, yeah. But here's the powerful thing. Then we're going to build everything around those 7 words, right? This is where it's incredibly powerful, building around those 7 words, because now I've gotten everything refined down to the essence of what's there. Now, let's talk about mobile devices for just a little bit. Most modern page builders allow for a responsive design on mobile. Make sure it does. And whatever you do, make sure it does. And then make sure it does. Because 80% of your readers are probably going to read it on some type of a mobile device. 80% are going to do this on some type of a mobile device. And if they do it on some type of a mobile device, then you want to make sure that it looks good on a mobile device. And that nothing's left hanging out on the side, nothing, you don't have to pinch and squeeze and expand the screen. Make sure that it looks good. Build it on a desktop and test it on a mobile. And I have people with various devices that I ask to check everything that I do, because I build it on a desktop. It's silly to try to build it on mobile, right? But I built it on a desktop and then I tested that on a mobile to see how it looks. I had one yesterday that I had a reason I had to wrap something around the outside of it. And when I wrapped something around the outside of it, didn't work on mobile. It was responsive any other way, but because of what I was trying to do with it, I had to wrap something around the outside of it to shield it from something that was happening. And it looked terrible on mobile. Now, I use an HTML5 builder, Alex, and it's right 100% of the time, and I never have an issue with it, ever. I have other platforms that I use that have issues, and I was trying to do that yesterday, and that's what created the problem. But there you go. But this is the best way to do this. Build your design on a desktop and then use it here. That's a good question, Michelle. Michelle's asking, do I find it easier to start over from a blank page when trying to update websites to this style? I can build faster from a blank page than I can from going through and modifying templates. But I have a couple of classes that I teach and I have a couple of schools I run where I do provide particular templates for them to go back in and reword and do, but I try to build those with the idea in mind that we're talking about right here. We're just about finished. I got to answer one more question. Do I need a funnel? Do I need a funnel? This comes up all the time. There's a big focus on funnels right now. People talk about and this one's not in your notes for today, but I'm going to give you this one as a side. I don't care how good your funnel is. If your offer stinks, it won't be a high converting funnel. Does that make sense? You have an order in order to be successful. You have an order in order to be successful with a funnel. Number one, you have to have good quality traffic. Number two, you have to have a high converting offer. And number three, you need to put it in a funnel that makes the person in the funnel not have to think. And I think sometimes with upsells and downsells and bump sells and all the other stuff, people have to think too much and we divert them from the original action and then they get lost. So we're going to go through a process here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on your homepage funnels. But does that make sense to everybody? You have to have a quality traffic. You have to have a high converting offer, an offer that makes sense to the person who's looking at it. And then you have to put it in a funnel where it doesn't force the person to think. So we focus on the homepage funnels first, which are your basic funnels. And that's simply a link to the product and services. That's from your homepage to the next page, which is product and services. You're exactly right, Art. Even a single sales page is a funnel. Don't let the term mess you up. A funnel is just the customer experience. Exactly. Thank you for reminding me of that customer experience term again. I'm going to show you a little diagram of that in just a minute. But your basic funnel is a link to the product. So on your homepage, if you want to link to a product, if that's what it's about, then that takes them to the product or to the service or whatever that is. So it's simply, as Art said, it's that experience. And then there is a call to action, and that call to action becomes the next step. And that step might be a pop-up. It might be all kinds of things. It might be a calendar. It might be whatever it is, but it's a basic funnel. It might be where they learn more, okay? Do you want to find out more? Or where they schedule an appointment, or where they get a report opt-in or something like that, or they take advantage of a lead magnet. Maybe they get into a free membership site or something to that effect. But all of those things are basic funnels, and that's what your homepage should be. It should be a basic funnel. In other words, it should look something like this. And I know this is going to be really hard for you to see because it's hard to squeeze all of these steps onto a single slide here. So listen carefully as I talk through this. This is my home page. On the home page, I have an opportunity for people to book a time. My most wanted response is I want to get that person on a Zoom call. That's my most wanted response. I want to get them on a Zoom call. So everything on this page right here focuses getting them to book a time. Everybody understand that? Step one in the funnel, step two. And I'll give you a clear example of that in just a minute. The next thing is then that's going to take them to a quiz or a survey. In some cases on my site, depending upon what they're asking, that's going to take them to a quiz or a survey. Which then schedules them onto a video call. But the thing that most people forget is that there has to be additional communication in here. And so they get put on an email list and or a text message list. This allows me to be able to communicate even if they don't come back to the site. Does that make sense to everybody? This is the missing element. So many people forget to include this part right here in their sales funnel. Because as Art says, it's the customer experience. I can do this and this on the home page. So they don't ever have to leave. They don't go anywhere. They didn't have to think. But I have to be able to communicate with them. And this is the most important. This becomes the most important part of your funnel. All right? Everybody understand that? All right, let me jump off of here and I'm going to give you a couple of quick examples before we wrap up. Okay, you see my screen now? All right, this is the home screen. Do you see this? What's my most wanted response? To book a call. Have I made it obvious that I want you to book a call? Not lost with anything else. Logo on this side, conventions. Logo on this side. Call to action on this side. Call to action above the fold. Conventions, right? Now, down here, again, we've got the headline. I've broken the paragraph. There's 3 paragraphs, a subheadline. 3 paragraphs, a subheadline. I like to be able to put a quote over here so it's easily identified as a quote because people will read in this order. They'll scan the headline. If it's something that they like, what they'll do next is they'll look for the subheadline. If there's something that they like, they'll look for a quote because what somebody else says is way more important than what I say. Y'all following along? We're testing the water right here. What's holding you back? Right? Now, right here, before we get on a call, before we talk about getting into the cost, let's get on a call and find out where we go from here. What am I doing? I'm calling them to what? To this call to action. All right? Does that make sense? And my call to action is a calendar. Where I can book a call on the calendar right here. And again, what am I doing? This is funneling, right? I want to find out, does this person want to talk about business planning, business exploration, or business launch? Make sense? Those are all funnel actions, but it's that customer experience. Now, a while ago when we were talking about floating headlines, notice this headline right here, leveraged by your experience. And what do we use over and over again here? Right? You understand? We've tied the headlines to the content. Now, this is a good example here. This is a large headline over here. Just trying, it doesn't fit in the flow of this. Just want to throw that out there. And then they picture themselves running their own business leveraged by their own experience. This will catch people's attention. I give them 3 simple bullet points. Yes, I make them schedule a call. But do you see the bullet points here? I like the word. That's the reason why I used it too, Kim. Imagine your next step. What are we doing? We're taking them on a journey. I want to move them through that journey. But the easiest way for me to get on their team and be their coach and be their cheerleader is for them to get on the phone, get on a Zoom call with me so that we can talk about it. Look how short the sentences are. Look how short the paragraphs are. I don't have giant blocks of text. Totally different way to use bullet points than we used up here. I had to go in here and cut a whole bunch of stuff out to get that down to this, but I like it better when it's down to just these things. Make sense? Now, I have a calendaring system that we created for the sole purpose of being able to measure the response on a website. This is another one. So I know immediately who's clicking on what and booking appointments on which one of these 2 buttons. The longest text on the entire page are the testimonies. Yeah, Emma, just send me a note later and I'll hook you up. But again, I don't mind if I have a long testimony here. It doesn't matter to me. This is different than my copy. Understand? And then I have my final call to action here throughout the page. Let's take a look at the Usability page for this product, the Visual Story Mastery. All right, this is the home page. Again, this is click here so I can see you. This is the landing page. This is what you see first. Again, we've got the conventions we have the logo on this side over here. We have the call to action button over here, and the free training that will take you, when you click that button, it is intended to take you to the free training platform where you get your first training in the visual marketing or visual story mastery class. Has a video in place of, but what I had over here is this story. And I'm actually going to A/B test putting this story in a video. But here we go. It's call to action button. See, this is another example of that headline and how it's not supposed to be a floating headline. Branding is not for Fortune 500 companies only. And what's the first paragraph say? Most people think to create a meaningful brand, you have to hire brand strategists and designers. Understand? Headlines directly connected to that first paragraph. free training. You get the idea. 1, 2, 3 times it's shown, and we've barely gone through the page. Here we have brief headlines. Yeah, pretty nice, right? Who's this for? Great question. Starting entrepreneurs, established business owners, consultants, and offline marketers. Pretty obvious up here who this is for, right? Look at this. Corporate superstars making a transition to business. Over here, we have people over the age of 50 when the corporate world's finished with you. It's pretty obvious who it's for. You understand? No, eliminates confusion. Don't make me think. Does this apply to me? Don't make me think that. Here's what you get. It's a breakdown of what you get. Remember, on my site, it said, before we get into costs or anything else, let's get on a call. But here's a breakdown of what you get. How long is this paragraph, right? It's brief. Step-by-step worksheets. There we go. Three steps: sign up, learn, and become. It's that simple. And you click here to get started today. A testimonial, only one, an FAQ section, and a strong call to action at the end. Any questions about that? You understand those are two completely different perspectives, but accomplishing exactly the same goals that we talked about today. Are there any questions about that? Did not require massive amounts of text, but this is pretty simple, right? Do you see the power of this? Will this help you to create your ideal homepage website? We have two different markets, Rob. That's kind of the reason for the difference there. All right, if there's nothing else, then we're going to wrap it up today.